There have been plenty of crazy news in Russia in the last week, but this one has really stood out for me.
Начни сначала.
Уважаемый Владимир Владимирович, мы коллектив, работающий в компании ООО «РСК», регионально-строительная компания, индекс 108-813, город Москва.
The workers building a federal highway haven't been paid since September and they have gone on strike. Many don't have money for food. On top of that, fish ratios have been introduced in the far east of Russia. Please remember week 50 of the year 2024. It marks the beginning of the end of the country once known as Russia. Howdy, howdy, friends. My name is Konstantin. Welcome to Inside Russia, where usual Russia is explained by the unusual Russian. Welcome to Weekends. I give you crazy news updates straight out of the mad circus that unfortunately Russia has become. But first things first, there's no such absurdity that cannot be realized in Russia these days. Please remember that. Well, I call this news crazy news from Russia. For one simple reason, folks, they are absolutely crazy. Let me check the sound of the live stream. And I'll keep on going. I call them crazy news from Russia because they are crazy. The news of Russia that matter that you will not find in any mainstream media. I'd like to start with a fresh Putin joke. That's what I always try to start with. But lately, Putin himself started saying things that are even funnier than the jokes about Putin. For example, this past week, he said, Africa is close to Russia in spirit. And Africa values its sovereignty, according to Putin. With statements like that, no jokes required. And now straight to the news. Let me start with the Constitution of Russia. I always want to start with good news, but amusing news. News to make everyone laugh, uplift. This week I have none. Therefore, I start with the news about Russian constitution. Russian parliament proposed to change the constitution once again. The senator Nina Ostanina proposed to remove the strict ban on the formation of state ideology. For a wonderful reason, of course, in order to increase the birth rate in the country. According to Ostanina, many new bills aimed at promoting traditional values are passed in Russia, but there's still no answer to the question of what kind of state are we building? What is our ideology? This is a very crazy situation. The senator Nina Ostanina was born in 1955. She was close to 40 when the USSR collapsed. She graduated a university with a degree in history. She must know and remember the communist ideology, the ideology of the Soviet Union, and what a destructive effect that ideology had on the country and on regular people. When the new constitution of Russia was being created, one of the cornerstones was the idea that we are not to let the history of Russia repeat itself. We in Russia all were obsessed with never again. The memories of the USSR were so fresh, and most of us hated the old country. We were trying to build a new shining town on top of the hill. So we made the Constitution. And the Article 13, the Article 13.2 says no ideology can be established as a state ideology or mandatory ideology. And that is right. And that is good. Well, Russians must have very short memory because the Senator Nina Ostanina is trying to change the constitution and allow the state to establish the ideology. And most likely that ideology will be called Putinism. I am a real person full of feelings and emotions. And there's a tornado of emotions inside of me right now. They are destroying my country right in front of me. God, please help Russians wake up. Another news is holy. Alexander Sakhnenko, assistant administrator of Novosibirsk diocese, stood up for the head of Russian Church, Patriarch Kirill's private property. The Pope declared Sakhnenko that the Patriarch has a right to private property and could live in any way he wants to. I have no problem with that. We're all people in the first place. We're not popes in the first place, and Patriarch is also a person, you know. Alexander Sakhnenko, oh, not so fast. This thing about regular people, not so fast, because Alexander Sakhnenko, one of the high priests of Russian Church, was defending the right of the head of Russian Church to have a yacht. Check this out.
Поэтому каждый раз, когда люди начинают кричать про яхту патриарха и возмущаться, почему она не катается, я говорю, отстаньте от моей яхты. Это и моя яхта тоже.
Every time people start shouting about Patriarch's yacht and resenting the fact, I say, get off my yacht, this is my yacht too. And the yacht of the Metropolitan Nicodemus, and the yacht of a regular Pope Vasily from a Russian village. The yacht is all ours. First, you need to prove whether the yacht exists and whether it definitely belongs to the Patriarch. And even the yacht belongs to the Patriarch. I don't see anything wrong with My Holiness the Patriarch going sailing and, relaxing in the fresh air a couple times a month and good days. Well, I swear, they speak too much. If they kept silence, would have been much better. Well, this is the proof. This is the yacht called Pallada. It used to belong to oil company called Lukoil. Yes, the same company whose CEOs and executives mysteriously fly out of windows very often. Then this yacht was gifted to Russian Church, and it's being used by the Patriarch, as far as I understand. The outrage in the society is because he uses yacht as his own. The high priest also said that people, by criticizing the property of His Holiness, criticize the Church, as luxury items such as palaces and expensive furniture do not belong to individual, but they are part of the status of this position, Patriarch. Deep down in my heart, I hoped that the Russian Church is about faith, God, people, that the Church is honest in its relationship with God and with Russian people. But the high priest Alexander Sakhnenko finally told us the truth, that he did on camera, by the way, that it's all about status, expensive things such as furniture, luxury, yachts, and probably power. Other two news are medical. Something happened that I've never seen before, I've never heard before. Well, I live, I learn. In Tula province, a medical doctor, oncologist, diagnosed cancer to 13 patients for the sake of receiving bonuses. He didn't provide people with medical help for cancer, and the patients didn't even know that they had cancer, but their medical history records had cancer at early stage, all 13 of them. The doctor received bonuses that amounted to 39,000 rubles, or $390, for 13 so-called successful diagnoses. This doctor must have been desperate on cash. He exchanged his freedom and ability to practice medicine for the rest of his life for $390. The next medical news is also about a little side business of a medical doctor, but on a much larger scale. The Investigative Committee of Russia has opened a criminal case against a military doctor who implanted fragments of ammunition to simulate wounds to receive monetary compensation for being wounded in the war. More than 12 million rubles, or $120,000, were stolen from the state. Well, that's very creative. And you know what? I've never heard anything like that before. That's quite something, let me tell you. Let me check something before I jump to the next news. I would like to see how well I am heard. So we made... Okay, that's good enough. The next news is about potatoes. Belarus, Russia's ally, just introduced temporary licensing for potato exports from the country for the duration of 3 months. I know. At this point, you might have a smile on your face and say, Constantine, come on. What kind of news is that? Potatoes? Why? Why in the world did you pick it up? Well, and I respond to you after taking this sip of English breakfast tea. A wonderful tea by Twinings. No, I'm not sponsored by Twinings in any way. I just like this tea. I drink it all the time, and sometimes I drink English breakfast by Taylor of Harrogate. Also very good tea. Now, I say Belarus limiting potatoes exports is huge news. Huge news. A strategic one, actually, for both Russia and Belarus. And let me explain what I mean. The authorities hope that this decision will help to provide Belarusian domestic market with potatoes in the off-season. The government of the Republic of Belarus reported. Friends, please note, they reported that officially. You see, in Belarus, potatoes are important government matter. This is an odd news, really, because potatoes have historically been Belarus product number one, economy's bread maker. What oil and natural gas for Russia are, for Belarus, it's potatoes. Belarus grows and exports tremendous amount of potatoes every year. The more it exports, the better, the more dollars come into the country. And all of a sudden, for the first time in the history of the world, Belarus limits potatoes export. To understand why, you need to know that potatoes are a staple food for both Russians and Belarusians. In the USSR, we didn't starve because we had plenty of potatoes. And now, for the first time in history, hey, we are living in a time of first times. Russia is having incredible troubles with potatoes. I will zero in on potatoes in Russia because I think it's very important. It just shows you the poor state of Russian agriculture. Okay, so I will make a separate stream in the upcoming days. For now, all you need to know that there is trouble. The Russians are seeing this trouble in the food stores. The price of potatoes has increased by 57% since the beginning of this year. And the Belarusians know about that. And they're scared of Russia buying off all potatoes in Belarus because Russia is so much bigger. It just can suck all the potatoes. It can suck all the potatoes into the country out of Belarus. And then the Belarusians would be left with no potatoes to eat. And that's their food staples. And they have introduced potato control. So you see, this potato news is not that funny. It is yet another proof of shortage of one of Russia's foods on the horizon. And this is not just any food. This is the very basic, the very staple food. That's potatoes. It deserves a stream, definitely. It's coming in one of the following days. It's potato, cucumbers, eggs, butter, Anyway, before moving to the next news, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, those of you who have helped me over this few months that have been very hard for me. Thank you for watching the videos. Thank you for liking live streams. Thank you for participating in the live stream chats, commenting. Thank you for buying me coffees at buymecoffee.com. Thank you for becoming patrons, and thank you for PayPal. You have my promise, monetized or not. Yes, I'm still demonetized, but no matter what, I go in front of a camera every single day and I tell you the truth. So thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart. The next news comes from the European Union. It's not Russian news, but it concerns Russia directly. In Europe, they decide to permanently sever the ties with Russia in the energy industry. Доигрался конь на скрипке. Previously, Europe has toyed with such policy once, but it was unsuccessful. A new plan is under development, and according to the European Commissioner of the Energy, Dan Jorgensen, this will be a disaster for Russian economy. I absolutely think so. Many in Russia are hoping to return to normal life after the war with Ukraine is over. They dream of returning, they hope, they believe that they will return to normal trade, to normal economy. But you know what? It doesn't look that way. After what we heard from Dan Jorgensen, no. I've been saying that for 2.5 years now. Russians are going to pay a very high price for what they've done to Ukraine. Russian gas, Russian oil, seems like it is a goodbye. Goodbye, Russian gas, goodbye. Goodbye, and au revoir. As long as you remember me, I'll never be too far. Goodbye, Russian gas, goodbye. I always be true. So hold me in your dreams, but I will never come back to you. The next news is sensational. I kid you not. A Russian governor has finally discovered the reason why birth rate in Russia is dropping. See, the birth rate. I need a sip of the tea. The birth rate is important because without people, you can't run the country. You have no one to control. Without boys, you don't have soldiers. So very important to have families, to have many kids, to have boys, And that's been in the agenda of the Russian government lately for the last year because the birth rate is dropping. Well, and the good governor finally found the reason. Thank you so much. You see, us regular people, myself included, we thought that it was due to the war, due to the exodus of young Russians from the country. It was due to the falling economy that people couldn't afford kids anymore. It was due to political and economical instability. That's all turned out to be false. Kurgan province governor Shumakov, this guy right here, showed us the light. Turns out it's people's fault. Dropping birth rate in Russia is the fault of Russian people. You see, for the past 10 years, 30 years really, Russian people have been building a consumer society. This all needs to be changed. Thing is, the consumer society doesn't need children, according to this good governor. That's it. The governor also noted that money will not help in increasing demographics. So the root of all evil is consumerism, and the money isn't necessary. Money isn't that important. So Russian people don't buy much and live poor life. The good governor, thank you for opening our eyes. I take it they need to change the constitution to allow the state to create new ideology. Just for that. They need to replace consumerism with Putinism. Moving on to the crazy government actions news. The Deputy Prime Minister Tatiana Golikova, that lady's been in power at the higher echelons of power for 20 years now. She's one of close friends of Vladimir Putin. She announced the launch of a large-scale national project called Family. Its funding will amount to 18 trillion rubles in a period of 6 years. 3 trillion rubles per year, and the funding will come out of the federal budget from the taxpayers. The funding will begin on January 1st, 2025. See, they mean business. They announce 14th of December, and in 2 weeks, the funding begins. The goals of this project include supporting large families, supporting in strengthening, combining family and professional responsibilities. Whatever it is, I don't understand really. One of the goals is also development of kindergartens. It shall continue. 3 trillion rubles of taxpayers' money for the development of kindergartens? And I thought that Russian taxpayers are already paying for developing and building and maintaining kindergartens. That's one of the articles in our taxes. And we're paying a lot for that. Oh, I guess I was wrong. 18 trillion rubles. 28 billion US dollars. Not too shabby. Imagine how much out of that amount will be stolen. This is how super rich Russians are born. Let's move to the utilities collapse. Remember how often I forecasted, the fall in Russian utilities? Some people even started hissing at me. Konstantin, you are too apocalyptic. Russia will be fine. That's what Putin said. Well, not so fast. In Novosibirsk, the capital city of Siberia, 36 high-rise apartment blocks, 10 private houses, a school, and a kindergarten in the Oktyabrski district have been cut off heating for over 48 hours now. A breakdown happened in the heat delivery pipeline. The authorities promised to fix it, but so far the shutdown has only grown. In numbers, more and more apartment blocks joining the shutdown, being cut off from heat. In Novosibirsk, the temperature is now minus 8 degrees Celsius, but with a wind chill, it's 17 Celsius or about 0 Fahrenheit. The time to pay the bills has come. Why did that happen? What do you think? Well, partially due to shortage of workers. And speaking of which, we are seeing more shortages, more clear every single day. I'm showing you right now this document. This is an internal for your eyes only document born in Central Office of Russian Railway RZD. Due to the shortage of engine crews, the Central Office of Russian Railway sent out this telegram, demanding that the leaderships of professional unions of railway veterans conduct mandatory work with the retirees so that the retirees would return to work. Huh? This is real stuff. This is real deal. Look at the document right there. It happened this past week. And do you still think that Russia is well? I tell you what the next step will be. Mandatory return to work under new Russian law. That is only in the future. But now these documents are flying all over. And it's not just RZD. It's not just railroads. I'm pretty darn sure in the other industries the same thing is happening. So, hey, this is a week 50 of 2024. Remember this one. By the way, there will be more news like this. They come out every day now. So if you want to stay on top of things, sign up to become patron of Inside Russia at patreon.com. That's where I carefully select 9 news every day and make them available to patrons with my commentaries and analysis. 54 news per week, 9 news per day. Sunday, we take off. If you want to be on top of things in Russia, don't know where to look no further. Sign up Inside Russia, become patron, and enjoy all the news that matter. Well, a few news pieces on Syria. Well, Russian bases in Syria, to be precise. I start with Dmitry Peskov, Putin's press secretary. I quote, "Russia fulfilled its mission in Syria several years ago. It helped the country in the fight against terrorists and have been putting a lot of efforts into it. After that, it became Assad's responsibility." What a statement! If Russia fulfilled its mission few years ago, and after a few years ago it ceased, the whole thing in Syria ceased to be Russian business and it was transferred to Bashar Assad, what Russian bases were doing in Syria then? How much of taxpayers' money have been wasted? It turns out that Russian propaganda news agency RIA Novosti did own investigation. As a result of that investigation, RIA confirmed Kyiv's involvement in the events in Syria. Kyiv is behind all those bunch of terrorists. Well, they called them terrorists in the first place. Now they're official freedom fighters and the new government, but Kyiv is behind them. Imagine how resourceful, strong, and sophisticated Ukrainian intelligence must be to be behind toppling the regime of Bashar Assad that had assistance of Vladimir Putin and Russian military right there in Syria. Imagine how this terminators those Ukrainians are, how strong they are, how great they are. The peculiarity of Russian propaganda is to tell that the Ukrainian authorities are so weak-willed puppets of the United States, and at the same time, they blame Ukraine for Russia's failures and defeats everywhere, both in the terrorist attacks in Moscow, in Syria, and in other events. In Russian propaganda, the Ukrainians are almost always behind the failures of Moscow, as Ukraine is an insidious and strong opponent all over the world. But at the same time, simultaneously, the Ukrainians are weak and running away on the battlefield from Russian soldiers during combat operations in the war. This is how they work. I'm catching them red-handed. Please be informed. Know the truth. Another important thing to know is that Russian propaganda has turned its position on Syria 180 degrees. Before it was, we need Syria. Syria is an important ally. Syria is an important asset. Russia benefits from Syria. Syria is so needed, crucial. And now, it was a long time ago when Russia was establishing bases, And now, who needs Syria? This is useless to us. Just a waste of resources. We should have left a long time ago. And they're all following Dmitry Peskov's lead. And the breaking news from Syria, it's happening right now. Russian troops are evacuating from Khmeimim air base right now. Perhaps fleeing, I don't know that, but it's happening right now. Reuters is covering the development, and it appears that the Russians are evacuating into Libya. Oh, good luck. Summing up the Syria ordeal, 10 years of helping the butcher Bashar Assad. We all have heard of his underground secret prison that where political opponents were tortured and pressed by presses and all those terrible things. So anyway, 10 years of helping that butcher to destroy Syria and kill Syrians. Billions of Russian taxpayers' dollars spent. And the result of everything, Russian troops fleeing again. The result of that, Assad evacuated and granted political asylum in Moscow. It's brilliant geostrategy from Vladimir Putin. The next news comes from a Russian licensing agency. Yes, there is a government agency that licenses stuff. Russians will be banned from playing PC games. The authorities are preparing to introduce release certificates for computer games. Now, before the game's release, developer will first have to prove that there's no material in the game that would negatively affect young Russians, offend the feelings of believers, or otherwise violate the laws of Russian Federation. And of course, the developer must make sure that there's no materials criticizing Russian government and Vladimir Putin, Russia's president. Only after censorship, game will be released. Experts fear that the new rule will lead to a sharp reduction in the games available to Russians. That's not really of a concern of the licensing agency, is that? I'll say one more time. This is stepping stones. First, movies, then books, then music, and now computer games. Now, before we move to the next news, I'd like to ask you a couple favors. First, please like this video if you haven't done so. And second, please select 3 news that you like the most and let me know what they are down below in the comments. I'd love to hear your feedback, and that helps me a lot when I select the news to report to you next time. Thank you so much. I have some economic news, a block of economic news for you. Well, first is inflation in Russia in November reached a record level since 2002 in 22 years. It doubled in a month from 0.75% to 1.43%. And this is just the beginning. Russian central bank is expected to raise the key interest rate to 23% this coming week. Some say 25, we don't know. I think it's going to be 23, but we'll see. I can be wrong. This will lead to further increase in loan rates, loan interests. Mortgages will be expected to reach 29% on average, and consumer loan rates are gradually approaching 50%. You want to take a loan, a personal loan, 46, 47%. How about that? Nice. I don't even know the statistics on the credit cards. That must be even higher. Folks, can you imagine yourself taking a loan at 46%? Now, the next news is the central bank admitted that it will not be able to return inflation to 4% next year. And it was stated by the head of the central bank, Elvira Nabiulina. She said this will happen only in 2026. And that, my friends, is another lie by Elvira Nabiulina. Russia will not see 4% annual inflation for at least a decade. The damage that has been done to Russia by its government and leadership is just too big. The recovery will be very painful and very slow. Elvira Nabiulina also made an interesting statement. I quote, "With high inflation, economic growth cannot be sustainable." And I fully agree with her. Well, I continue quoting. "It's like a high heart rate in a long-distance run. You can run with a high heart rate for a short distance. You can sprint. But you cannot run for a long distance." Or, as we sometimes say, inflation is like fever in a person and a sign of a certain disease. Elvira, you are right on. It is the sign of disease. And we all know the disease's name. It's called WAR. But Nabiulina didn't say anything that we didn't know before. I mean, if you follow my channel, I keep on repeating that. Something else happened that I've never heard before. For the first time in 2.5 years, a Russian senator called Nabiulina's lies. The senator Nikolai Arefiev publicly announced that the government and Росстат hide real inflation from people. He believes that if real inflation is shown, it will be necessary to raise salaries of those who work for the government in the public sector and pensions of the retirees, and that the state has no intention of doing. And I agree with the good Senator Arefiev. Both Russian government and Росстат lie. Right on. I've been saying that for a long time, but this is the first time that a Russian senator confirms what I say. The next news is the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, called FAS, the antitrust agency, threatened retailers with measures in case of prices increase before the new year. Retail food stores, chains, we're talking about big chains, have been threatened with large fines for unjustifiably rising prices. I know, it kind of sounds odd because we live in Russia, they're supposed to live in capitalism. And in capitalism, you can't really, free markets, the government cannot control prices, right? Well, in Russia, they can. Again, large fines, threats of large fines for unjustifiably rising prices of food before New Year holidays. How is that exactly possible? If the costs of food produced are rising, therefore the producers are forced to raise their prices, right? Well, makes sense. Let's listen to the vice president of Russian Associations of Bakers and confectioners, new word for me, very confectioners, those who produce candies. So the Association of Bakers and Confectioners, Irina Eldarkhanova, that I quote her. The situation with chocolate is extremely bad. Retail food store chains are absolutely not interested in market conditions, raw material prices, and any other cataclysms. They don't care that cocoa beans have quadrupled in price and the dollar to ruble ratio has risen by almost 30%. The retail believes that if a bar of a chocolate costs 100 rubles, $1, then there's this is how much it should cost. And how manufacturers do that is none of their business, but the price must not be increased. For example, in the last 2 weeks of November, when the sharp fall of ruble began, the price of a mass of bitter chocolate with the lowest content of cocoa product, 56%, increased by 40%. Obviously, Russian ruble, well, that's the cocoa beans, they don't grow in Russia, they're bought for dollars from abroad. And then if ruble becomes cheaper, the manufacturers pay more for the chocolate. Because of that, I assume the manufacturers will collapse because they will either have to pay fines to retail chains for not delivering products or add 150 rubles to each bar of chocolate. 100 grams of real chocolate costs 260 to 270 rubles right now. If the growth of currency continues, meaning Russian ruble devalues, then chocolate will rise in price to 300 to 350 rubles. Chocolate will soon become an unaffordable luxury delicacy that a significantly fewer people will be able to afford. There is nothing in Russia right now that is not rising in price. It rises every month, and every even every week by at least 3 to 5%. Absolutely all raw materials are constantly growing in price. I unquote Honorable Irina Ildarkhanova. Now, she leads the Association of the Chocolate Producers. Listen to her. She's absolutely right. She just described what is happening in one of the industry, but it's not just the bakers and chocolatiers. That's everyone else. It's the same situation. She just described the phase of the economic tsunami. And I talk about it a lot in my own words, but I just quoted an official inside one of the industries that is hurting bad. The last news, in economy, things happen gradually, usually, almost always. When something happens instantly, that's a catastrophe. That's a natural disaster or something like that. Usually, nothing happens instantly, but gradually. Well, for example, all of a sudden you start hearing weather people forecasting a big storm coming your way. And after some time of hearing the forecasts, for a couple days sometimes, all of a sudden you see a dark cloud, a small dark cloud somewhere on the horizon. And you feel first gust of wind. Or take a rainstorm. Rainstorm always begins with one raindrop that you feel on your face. You never feel, whew, and that's it, downpour. It just starts with one drop. Well, in Russia, on week 50 of the economic, of year of 2024, the economic problems that have been forecasted for a long time, on the week 50, they have taken the real life form. Check this out.
Начни сначала.
Уважаемый Владимир Владимирович, мы коллектив, работающий в компании ООО «РСК», региональная строительная компания, индекс 108-813, город Москва, и московский,
Look at the faces of these people.
Генеральный директор Сакун Борис Владиславович, главный бухгалтер Дульская Анна Борисовна.
Basically, I will tell you something about this guy as he continues to speak. He's a spokesperson for this group of workers. You see, he's even being filmed by at least two cameras. One camera in front of us and another one he was filmed on the camera that we're seeing right now. So this group of construction workers working on M12 highway, they began a strike due to salary delays. The builders of the section of the M12 expressway highway in Bashkortostan said that they have not been paid since September. They began a massive strike. According to the workers, 600 builders who worked on the site have already quit due to not getting paid. Some of the remaining workers cannot leave and travel home due to lack of money for travel. They just simply can't buy tickets. Look at these people. They are desperate, and they're begging Putin to help them. It's incredible. Now, in the media, the M12 highway which runs between Moscow and Tyumen, has been called the project that Vladimir Putin personally oversees. According to the plan, construction was supposed to be completed in 2024. All Russian companies engaged in construction of highways and roads are facing massive bankruptcies in 2025 due to the reduction in the number of orders and the increase in the key rate to 21% and possibly to 23% in just a few days. All government contracts for the construction of all infrastructural facilities and roads in the amount of 5 billion rubles and above have been postponed or frozen for the subsequent years. There are no projects, no large projects, all gone. As a result, total revenue of the construction companies at the end of the year will fall by 42.9% compared to 2022. And the remainder of contracted work from 2024 to 2027 will decrease from 54.9% to just 10%. At the same time, the financial indicators of companies are being hit by the increase in expenses for construction materials, fuel, and employee salaries. It all starts somewhere. There is always a first drop of rain. And this has started. Much more to come. But the biggest and the most emotional news for this week for me is food rationing. In Kamchatka, and that's Russia's Far East, fish began to be sold by special food coupons called the social cards. This is how a social card there looks like, and this is the people standing in line to receive such a card. The local government started issuing social cards that allow purchase of cheap fish. To receive a social card, one needs to present passport and social security card. Who will receive the social food cards? Well, the participants and the disabled of World War II, residents of besieged Leningrad, former prisoners of Nazi concentration camps, ghettos, and other places, veterans of the military operations, holders of the status of child of war, and citizens that receive regional social subsidies to their pensions. There is no shortage of food on the shelves of Russian stores as of today, but there are people who can't afford to pay the price of food, and their number is growing. And I give credit to the local government of Kamchatka region for trying to somehow subsidize fish, allowing people to get something that would buy them fish at a reduced price, okay? The inflation in Russia is just at the beginning of a very steep and long rise. This is just the beginning, okay? We have decades of misery up front. And food will be increasing in price, and numbers of the unfortunate not being able to afford food will grow. This case in Kamchatka reminds me of first food shortages in the USSR. In the city of Rostov, where I was growing up, there was a system of coupons for butter. We call them talony na maslo, the butter coupons. You could buy as much butter. In 1992, butter all of a sudden disappeared from Russian stores. It became, you still could buy it, but you had to look for it. You have to go from one store to another store, okay? And you could buy as much butter as you wanted at local farmers markets, but it was very expensive and unaffordable. And butter at stores, Soviet stores, was cheap but scarce. So they came up with this brilliant idea to start issuing butter coupons to limit the amount sold to one person. I remember it's two pieces of packages of butter. Each one was 200 grams, or was this 17 ounces, 18 ounces, something like that. So 36 ounces of butter, 400 or 1 pound, and or 400 grams for one person for a month. The year was 1983. I remember my parents were confused and shocked when butter coupons were introduced. And it was the first drop of rain back then. I clearly remember I was attending the first grade. What followed was a torrential downpour. And by 1989, they had coupons for almost all foods and products, and the country was falling apart. The very same thing they're doing in Kamchatka right now. They're trying to limit the sales of cheap fish and somehow allow people to have access to it. Okay? But this is the first drop of rain. Friends, remember week 50 of 2024. It all starts somewhere, and it has started. There will be much more to come. Carthago delenda est.